A new discovery published last week in Science pushed back the date of the oldest Oldowan stone tools to at least 2.6 million years. Who made these tools? How were they used? And what do we know about where they were unearthed? We explore these questions and more in this episode of Lunch Break Science. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Ariel Johnson, your host from the Leakey Foundation, a nonprofit that supports human evolution research and shares discoveries. Today's guest is a Leakey Foundation grantee, member of our Science Executive Committee, and paleoanthropologist who led the exciting excavation of this groundbreaking discovery. Now, let's welcome Dr. Tom Plummer.
Hello. Hello, everybody.
Tom, thank you so much for being here with us, and congratulations to both you and your colleagues.
Yep. Yeah, we took care of we used the COVID time well, our time at home.
Absolutely. So today, Tom joins us from New York, where he is a professor of anthropology at Queens College and the CUNY Graduate Center. Tom is also a research associate at the Smithsonian Natural History Museum's Human Origins Program and the New York Consortium of Evolutionary Primatology. Tom's research takes him to the Homo Peninsula in southwest Kenya, near Lake Victoria, which is where this amazing discovery was made. Before we dig deeper, though, thank you to the Ann and Gordon Getty Foundation, Camilla and George Smith, and the Joan and Arnold Travis Education Fund, who made this episode possible. And thank you to all our viewers. Let us know your thoughts in the chat, comments, and by liking this video. If you're watching live, be sure to get your questions for Tom into the chat. The earlier you get those questions in, the more likely your question might be featured. So, Tom, the word of the day is Oldowan.
Right.
What are Oldowan tools?
Well, Oldowan tools are some of the oldest tools ever made, but it might be interesting to actually compare them first to the oldest technology, which is the Namequian at 3.3 million years ago. The Namequian is known also from East Africa, on the west side of Lake Turkana, where that box is, and in a project directed by Sonia Harman and Jason Lewis. These massive tools have been found. They tend to be bigger than Oldowan tools. They tend to be kind of blocky, and they're flaked often by using a big anvil on the ground. If you look at that upper right panel, by taking a core, the rock that you're going to knock a flake off of, and striking it against an anvil on the ground and knocking off a flake, or by taking a core, if you look at the upper left panel, and placing it on another rock and hitting it on top through something called bipolar percussion. By smacking it basically like a hammer and anvil, you can knock flakes off that way. So this is the oldest technology. It's not clear which hominin's making it. This predates genus Homo, and it's interesting because it's different than the Oldowan. It's not clear whether evolutionarily it actually leads into the Oldowan, or whether it's just this really interesting experiment that took place in the west side of Lake Turkana. And mind you, this has not been known very long, so the researchers are still working a lot of these interesting questions out. The Oldowan, in contrast to the Namequian, is often, the flakes are often produced through freehand percussion. The objects are smaller, so it's very mobile. Hominins are walking around with these stones. They're using a hammerstone to strike a core, like it's shown in that upper left panel, and knock off sharp shards of stone, flakes. And these flakes can be used for anything, to cut essentially anything that would have been in the environment. They could be used to work wood. They could be used to butcher animals. And it's not just cutting that's important. The pounding component of Oldowan tools is significant as well. So cobbles could be used for pounding, or even the cores themselves were used for pounding things too. So even though it was a simple technology, it allowed hominins to cut and pound a wide variety of things. So it looks like this may be, in terms of the course of hominid evolution, a really important technological step.
So why are Oldowans so important when we're thinking of early technology in the bigger picture?
Right. Well, if you think about the Oldowan, the thing that makes the Oldowan stand out. It's the oldest really widespread and long duration technology. So the Oldowan, so here you see, Oldowan flakes being produced, and they still do hammer and anvil, and they're still doing bipolar percussion too sometimes. So, but a lot of it's the freehand percussion, like I said. And Oldowan tools, start off, you know, sort of enigmatically. They appear in Eastern Africa, and then gradually, historically about 2.6 million years ago. Our site might be a little bit older than that now, but around 2.6 million years ago, and then spreads, across Africa gradually, so that by 2 million years ago, you've got Oldowan tools from northern Africa down to southern Africa. It's still in Eastern Africa. And ultimately with Dmanisi, the Oldowan tools are in Georgia. There was a report recently in China of tools that are probably Oldowan tools in China at 2.1 million years ago. So the Oldowan really is covering a big geographic area. And as I said, it's around from about 2.6 to 1.7 million years ago. That 1.7 million terminal date is not really the extinction date of the Oldowan. It's just that's when the Acheulean tools, the next industry, comes in between 1.7 and 1.8 million years ago. So sometimes 1.7 is used as a terminal date for the Oldowan, but hominins are still making tools using the same technique, beyond 1.7 million years ago. So you get these, in archaeological sites, you get this faceted stones, like you see in the left side. Those are the cores where the flakes have been knocked off. Those are the facets are the negatives of the core of the flakes that are being knocked off. And then you get the flakes, which are used to cut things. So basically, the Oldowan gives you, a set, basically a Swiss Army knife, essentially in the form of rocks, where every time you need a blade or a sharp object, you can knock it off with flaking, or you've got this pounding component too. So, and the Oldowan, hominid activities, were now bringing them in more direct contact with carnivores. So you see evidence for both carnivore activity and hominid activity at some Oldowan sites. Hominins are almost certainly scavenging from carnivores at times. They're also, I think, often hunting. I think they're both hunting and scavenging, most likely. Carnivores are interested in the residues the hominins are producing. So you have carnivores scavenging from the hominins as well. So you see hominids probably forming more, because they're in coming into interaction with carnivores more. Environments also are becoming more open frequently or more variable in terms of climatic change. Hominids are probably spending, their group cohesion's probably increasing. And, we can talk about the kinds of foods hominids are getting. They're foods that would have been, shareable. So it may be that food sharing is becoming more important when hominids are using this technology as well, that it would have facilitated food sharing. And just in terms of what the tools are good for, this is one quartzite flake I had. This is a goat limb that I bought in Queens at a halal market. And I cut, with that one quartzite flake, I defleshed the bones. I defleshed the goat limb. So all that meat has been taken off. And then I disarticulated the bones. And then with a couple of cobbles, you could just pound the bones open to get marrow. So that just shows, just one flake, I was able to do that. Just take that limb, take all the flesh off it, disarticulate the bones. And in disarticulating the femur from the acetabulum, from the pelvis, I left a big cut mark on the head of the femur, and you can see that there. And we look for those sorts of cut marks when we're looking at sites and excavating bones. We look for cut marks on the bones that the hominids would have left using their stone tools. And here bones are being broken over. I talked about just using cobbles, or cores could be used for this as well. And hominids are breaking bones open for marrow. So there's a nice plug of marrow that'd be ready to be eaten, kind of like a jiggly Slim Jim. And the thing about that is to remember is that all of this is being eaten raw. There's no evidence that Oldowan hominids had control of fire. So, you're talking about eating raw meat. You're talking about eating raw marrow.
Well, before we turn the virtual floor to you, because I know we all are anxious to hear more about this discovery, if you want to learn more about human evolution, amazing research going on all over the world, and the latest discoveries, you can start by subscribing to our YouTube channel, turning on notifications, and help make new episode possible by supporting through giving. Now, let's turn the virtual floor over to Tom and hear more.
Okay. So I'm going to talk about this site that we've been working on for a little while now called Nyanga. And since this is lunch break science, we'll talk about some of the foods that we think hominids were eating at this site. This is showing bed NY1, Nyanga bed 1, and 2 excavations we put in bed NY1. This is excavation 3, and this is excavation 5. So I'll be talking about those 2 excavations in my talk. And, you know, one of the things that's characteristic of humans is that humans extract food from the environment using technology. We're really technologically dependent creatures. If you imagine being dropped anywhere in the world just naked and having to survive, you'd have to create shelter, you'd want to make fire, you'd have to create some kit, some technology to help you forage, to get food. You know, we would die without technology. And why I'm interested in the Oldowan is the Oldowan is the oldest sort of widespread expression of technology in the archaeological records. So I'm interested in what the adaptive significance of the Oldowan was from the perspective of a hominin later in time that's dependent on technology. So let's see. So when you see Oldowan tools, they first appear like historically since I was a graduate student. So of course it's historic if I'm that old. Since I was a graduate student, Oldowan tools have been known appearing around 2.6 million years ago for a long time in the Gona region, and more recently, not very far away, within about 40 kilometers at Ledi Gararu. So 2.6 million years ago seemed to be about the time that the Oldowan was appearing. I mean, people speculated there could be older Oldowan sites, but we hadn't found any. And interestingly enough, these 2 occurrences are very close to each other in one particular region of East Africa. So it wasn't clear whether it was originating in this region or whether this was sort of sampling error that we had the sites close together at around 2.6. Certainly a little bit later in time, by 2 million, or roughly 2 million years ago, Oldowan sites are found across Africa, from North Africa to South Africa, still in East Africa. I mentioned this site in China at 2.1 million years ago. The Oldowan just seems to expand geographically, which makes me think that probably it was pretty, adaptively significant, that it was impacting adaptability for the hominins, and that hominin groups that used the Oldowan were more likely to survive. And, you see hominid sites in a wide variety of environments. You see clear evidence of butchery and plant processing, but we weren't as sure what was going on at the really Oldowan sites, early Oldowan sites. And like I said, why were they only found in this one spot? Is that where they were originating from? And what we discovered recently was that, in fact, we have an early Oldowan site now 1,300 kilometers away from those original sites at a site called Nyanga on the Hamad Peninsula of Lake Victoria. And here's the Hamad Peninsula. You've got this central volcano in the center of that peninsula. There's a site called Kanjara that was a known Oldowan site that I have spent about 20 years working at with colleagues. And it was while we were working on Kanjara that we had a person who was working with us, a local person who excavated with us, who told us that he knew of Nyanga, of another site. And we went and visited with him, and that's how we found Nyanga. So Nyanga, this is sort of it's a Google Earth view of Nyanga. There's a long gully that you can walk along, and then it gradually fills out, it deepens, and you get a broader set of exposures here. So as you're walking, in the sequence, there's a freshwater spring, so that would have provided fresh water year-round to the hominins, which would have been attractive. This gully area is exposing deposits that were laid down by a stream channel along that yellow line, dotted line. And that stream channel would also have had water, at least seasonally, that hominids would have taken advantage of. And there were trees probably lining the stream channel. And as you walk along there, and as we were first walking along there, we saw artifacts and fossils outcropping. And so here's an artifact that was just on the surface. And a wide variety of fauna was found. Pigs are really important. The pigs at Nyanga were definitely older than the pigs at Canberra, which was 2 million years old. So we knew Nyanga was definitely older than Canberra. And in fact, Laura Bishop, who's a pig expert who's on the project, was looking at the pigs and said these have to be older than 2.5. So that was one of the first indications that we had in an old site. You've got other equids, so horse relatives, lots of antelopes, a lot of hippos, and this reflects the stream channel and freshwater spring nearby. I think this was hippo heaven. You've got saber-toothed cats. So the fossils are all fossils from Nyanga. Dinotherium, this giant, bizarre elephant-like creature. Enormous crocodiles. We've got a giant crocodile tooth that we dubbed Croczilla. And also lots of monkeys who were most likely sheltering in the trees that were along the stream channel. And we also found early in our investigation of Nyanga, we found a Paranthropus tooth. And this is the first ancient hominin found from the Hama Peninsula. Even though people have been working in the peninsula since 1911, no one had found a demonstrably ancient hominin. This was the first one. And it's also the largest hominin tooth ever found. It's an upper molar and attributed to Paranthropus, a creature that's a cousin of Homo, right? Our genus, had enormous jaws and teeth, right? A really big face, enormous jaws and teeth. The surface area of its molars would have been 4 times the surface area of a Homo sapiens molar. So really flaring cheekbones, really big muscles to power these jaws, and it was a chewing machine. And we found bones on the surface that had clear indications of hominid activity. These are stone tool cut marks. And this is on a shaft fragment of a thigh bone probably. And also when you flip it over, there are flake scars. This bone was actually broken open for marrow too. Those flake scars were formed when it was smashed with stone tools. So they cut the meat off it, then they ate the marrow out of it. And one of the first things you have to do is work out the geologic sequence. So there are 4 beds at Nyanga. The bed I'm going to be talking about today is bed NY1. It's got, it's dated through a variety of different means, from magnetostratigraphy. The Earth's magnetic field flips periodically. So, in these dark intervals, it's the same orientation as it is today. You walk outside with the compass and the needle points to the north. For these white intervals, the Earth's magnetic field is actually directed opposite of what it is today. So if you walked outside with a compass, the needle would actually point towards the south. When you can actually look at the sediments you've got and see how little iron particles are oriented in the sediments to tell whether the magnetic field was pointing normally like it is today, or whether it was reversed in the past when those sediments were being deposited. And we can see that you've got this black shows that the sediments were normal in the past. And we are in fact attributing it to this normal that's between 2.59 and 3.05. There are a variety of lines of evidence that point to this normal. We've got some apatite dates, absolute dates that are suggestive of about 2.9 million years. And the fauna is indicative. It's consistent with the fauna as well, this time interval. So this is the time interval that we're using for the site. And in fact, since we've got some dates that are around 2.9, I'm confident it's between 2.6 and 3.05, but it could very well be there that it's closer to 2.9 when the deposition of the beds that I'm going to talk about today occurred. So here's bed NY1, excavation 3, excavation 5. We sank this excavation here because we found a bunch of hippo bones and some stone tools in the surface, and I wanted to see what we'd find in C2, and we actually found part of a hippo skeleton in C2. And this obviously was cool because not only did we think it was old, but we've got fossils preserved at this site, and most old sites don't have a lot of fossils preserved. And there were stone tools associated with the hippo. And what was odd to us, though, initially, was that the bed with the hippo in it ended very abruptly. And, we actually didn't have an entire hippopotamus here. We had part of a hippopotamus, because this line here is actually marking a fault. And this sediment is actually down faulted. So we had to dig down this poor hippopotamus to add insult to injury. It died, it's butchered, and then it's down faulted, half of it. So these blue dots are the hippo bones. They're actually down faulted 2 meters, and we had to dig 2 meters down on this side to actually get down to the same level that we had up here. We did it though. So we were able to put the hippo back together after 2.9 million years of separation. And the hippo bones were really cool. They're from, it's clear it's a death site, so there are a lot of ribs and vertebra, things that would hang around where the animal died. There are stone tools in very close association with the bones, so that made us think for sure the hippo was butchered. There are cutting tools, but there are also some pounding tools at the site, and this pounding tool is really pitted, which suggests that it was being used to pound for a while. It's a hard stone. It's a quartzite, so it would have taken a couple of hours at least to get that much pitting into it. And we had marks on them that we thought were cut marks. This is a mark on a hippo rib, is an illustration of that. It's got calcium carbonate in it, right? The surface of the bone itself is not very nice, but the calcium carbonate preserved the internal morphology of the groove, and you can see there are deep striations in it. And this is what you get. You get these little lines inside of grooves when stone tools are being used, when cut marks are being made. So this looks like it's a rib with a cut mark on it. And as we were closing up the season in 2017, just before COVID, we came upon a hominin tooth in the excavation at the same level as the hippo. Just 3 feet away from the hippo skeleton with artifacts, there was this hominin tooth, and it ended up being another paranthropus tooth, right? This big-faced, giant-jawed creature. In addition to excavation 3, we were excavating up here. We were finding fossils eroding out of the surface here, and we put an excavation in. We had multiple. This excavation is not completed. There's still a lot more to do here, but we were finding clusters of hippo bones here, like bones that wouldn't be found together in the same region of a skeleton. So a pelvis bone with a shoulder blade bone. Here's a shin bone, the top of the shin bone, a tibia. Here's the heel bone, the calcaneus. And when we looked at the shin bone, there are cut marks on this area, which is a major area for muscle attachment. You can see that there are cut marks here. So this hippo had been butchered as well. So we had 2 different hippos at 2 different places in this bed, NY1, and both of them were butchered. In order to continue getting information about stone tool usage and to broaden it out beyond what we just see with the bones, we work with people who are experts at interpreting stone tool function. Cristina Lammarini at University of Rome, La Sapienza, and Isabella Caracola. And they were looking at the where they created a library, a reference library, using artifact replicas of the same raw materials that we make stone tools, that the hominids made stone tools from. And then they carried out a bunch of activities that you can see here to create basically a reference sample to interpret the useware on the actual archaeological specimens. And there's a lot of pounding damage on the tools, more pounding damage than any other Oldowan site. So there are cutting foods, but there are also pounding foods. It looks like both soft and hard plant tissues are being cut and pounded, and that would include underground storage organs. Wood looks like it's being worked, maybe to make tools with stone tools, so make wooden tools. It looks like some softer plant foods, perhaps fruit, were being broken open as well. And also it's clear from the use where we get corroboration that we had from the analysis of the bone surfaces that meat was being cut and bones were being broken open for marrow. So questions people have been asking me about these is which hominins made the Oldowan tools, right? This is an early Oldowan site. Which hominids do we think made them? And did the hominids actually hunt the hippos? And, there are a lot of hominins around during the time interval of the Oldowan. And these are just the ones from East Africa. There are Oldowan tools in South Africa too, and there are additional hominins down there. So the hominids that could potentially make the tools, the list is pretty big. And in fact, it could be that more than one hominin species is making tools, and it could be even more than one hominin genus is making tools. So you've got the genus Paranthropus. Early members are the earlier time interval of Paranthropus. The species is Paranthropus aethiopicus, that evolves into Paranthropus boisei during the time interval of the Oldowan. There are forms of Australopithecus around in North Africa, in East Africa and South Africa. This is an East African one in the middle there, Australopithecus gari. There are three forms of Homo around that are clearly defined, in sites a little bit younger than 2 million years ago. Homo erectus is appearing around 2 million years ago. There's also Homo habilis and Homo rudolfensis, which presumably are a little bit older. But the oldest forms of Homo, this, for example, the specimen at Ledi Gararu at 2.8 million years ago in Ethiopia, it's not assigned to a species. So you wouldn't call it a habilis, or you wouldn't call it rudolfensis. You would just call it Homo. So if we think about it, these lineages, you've got, ancestor-descendant relationships within Homo, ultimately leading to Homo erectus, most likely. And also you've got Aethiopicus leading to Boisei in East Africa. So you've got the Paranthropus lineage, you've got the Homo lineage, and you've got Gari, you've got Australopithecus around as well. And I think, it's possible that you could actually have more than one hominin making these tools, especially at the early sites. And we know that Lemequian, there is another industry out there 3.3 million years ago. And that's before the time interval that Homo is known. So non-Homo hominins must be making stone tools. So people tend to just associate the Oldowan with the genus Homo. And that's partly because the Oldowan was associated with Homo habilis, and its name, able, the able hominin or the handy hominin, the use of Oldowan tools was actually part of its original definition as a taxon. So people tend to associate Homo with stone tools, but it may be that some of the other lineages were making stone tools too. Even Paranthropus, which has got all of these specializations for heavy chewing, but it still could have, fruitfully used stone tools to process things that its large jaws and teeth wouldn't have been very good at processing. So I don't know, but we've got Paranthropus at the site, and people have generally assumed that it was Homo, and I think we should keep open the possibility that Paranthropus was making stone tools too. And I think this will become clearer as we get more and more early sites and hopefully hominin associations with them, and we see a pattern of multiple species or one species or one lineage being associated with the stone tools. Maybe we'll be able to make a better judgment of that over time. In terms of the hippos, I don't think the hominids were killing the hippos. Hippos are huge, dangerous animals, but hippos die naturally. And hippos are killed by carnivores. And there are saber-toothed cats, which would have been able to kill hippos around. They're even at Nyanga. We've got a jaw from a saber-toothed cat at Nyanga. So I think the hominids are probably scavenging the hippos. So in summary, when you think about Nyanga and what we've learned from it, we've learned that the earliest Oldowan was much more widely distributed than we had appreciated in the past. And I think we had hints of this with Mohammed Sanouni's paper on sites in Algeria 2.4 million years ago. He recently expanded the Oldowan to North Africa 2.4 million years ago. And I think probably the Oldowans found in a wider distribution at an earlier time than we realized, which I think is really exciting to think about stone tool usage being pushed back in time. At its inception, Nyanga shows that these tools are being used to process a wide array of foods, animal foods certainly, and even some of the biggest animals in the landscape, like hippos, are giant animals. They're huge leather sacks full of good things to eat, but if you don't have stone tools, you can't actually get at the goodies. And also plant foods, so underground storage organs, starchy foods, and fruits, woodworking, possibly making tools with tools. I think all of this is going on. So a wide array of materials are being processed with Oldowan tools right as soon as you find, the Oldowan. You're getting packets of food that are large enough to share, which might be important in terms of thinking about, you know, how the economy of these early hominins was sort of structured, and whether food sharing, whether they're starting to go after foods that are harder to acquire, that you can get with the assistance of technology, and they're sort of lessening their risks of going after these hard to acquire foods by actually sharing food more within a group. And there's a lot of pounding activity at this site, so something's going on. I think that's a reflection of probably a lot of plant processing, actually. And once again, this is not the first time the Paranthropus has been associated with Oldowan tools. And people have in the past often discounted, including me, Paranthropus as a tool user. But perhaps Paranthropus was a tool user, and maybe we'll have to keep an open mind about that as we continue excavating in these regions. And thanks very much. This project is in partnership with the National Museums of Kenya and the Human Origins Program of the Smithsonian. And a wide array of funding sources have given money to it: the Leakey Foundation, National Science Foundation, Wintergren, PSC CUNY Research Award, the William H. Donner Foundation, and the Peter Buck Fund as well. So I'd like to thank all of my associates and collaborators and funders. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Tom. That was a really fascinating, quick look at that discovery. What was it like to be there?
Well, I mean, when you think about it, given that we had seen the site and we were actually brought there, the first thing we noticed as we were walking down to the site, if we can pull up these slides maybe, is just this path down to the lake. And there's Julian Louise, a paleontologist, who works in Oceania a lot, but also works with us in Kenya. Whoops, what happened to the slides? There, and he's actually at a point where Croczilla was found, where that giant croc tooth was found. As we were walking down this path, towards the lake, you see artifacts and fossils starting to be exposed. So here's an elephant tooth that was exposed in one of the gullies. You have artifacts being exposed as well. So, we were getting excited because it was clear that we had things that looked like the Oldowan. They were ancient tools, and there was fauna, and then it broadened out into this bigger region that was eroded, where there are a lot of artifacts and fossils on the surface. So we started we set up a grid so we could map this area, and then we worked on the geology to do, we started a provisional geologic sequence, which then the Unit B became NY1, the bed we're investigating now. And that was it. I mean, it was exciting just from the get-go. And, we initially we had a season in 2015 where we excavated and didn't really find very much. So I was a little worried. And then the next year in 2016, every excavation we put in the ground, we found fossils and stone tools. So it just shows that you just have to hit the right spot. And, persistence is important. And funding is important too, because if we had just been funded for 1 year, that would have been it. We wouldn't have found anything.
Another important component that you've talked about with me quite a bit, and I'm sure our viewers would be very interested, has been the team of researchers and collaborators. Who did your team comprise of?
Yeah, it's a huge research team. They're big collaborations. The oldest collaboration is with Rick Potts. He's co-directing this project with me, and in fact, I was a graduate student with Rick Potts. So he actually got the research clearance for that. Or it's scrolling quickly. There's Christina Lemorini at the University of Rome. So USWARE, Rahab Kinyanjui from the National Museums of Kenya, so Kenyan co-PI, Blasto Onyango directs the excavations. Jim Oliver is a taphonomist working with us. Laura Bishop's a pig expert. Raquel Lamela Lopez is a grad student who represents many grad students from CUNY who've worked with us. Shar Bailey is at NYU. She helped describe the fossils, the hominid fossils. Emma Feinstone's a curator at the Cleveland Museum. She's the lithic technologist. Scott Blumenthal does the enamel isotopic work. Peter Ditchfield is the geologist extraordinaire on the project. And my son came out for, I think, 4 field seasons and worked with us. So he represents the Plummer Family Institute.
And then you have, quite a few Kenyans that were also involved in the project too.
Right. So the 2 Kenyans I showed, Rahab and Blasto, and then also the huge Kenyan crew. We hire, you need to think, a lot about bringing the local people into the project and training local people to appreciate things. So we hire people locally at the excavation area, and then they understand more about their prehistory. They learn more about their prehistory. They appreciate it a lot, and they help preserve the sites as well as show us other areas where we can find things, because they now recognize and appreciate the prehistory. We give tours to student groups as well, so students know that something about the history right in their area.
Oh, that is wonderful. It's so great to have that kind of outreach and focus, and and what a great team to work with. It's like the dream team.
It is a good team. Yeah.
So during your talk, you focused on the sites at Nyanga, which is just one of many sites you work on in the Homo Peninsula. Tell us more about this region.
Well, the Homo Peninsula has been known since 1911. In fact, the first monkey fossils from Eastern Africa were found in the Homo Peninsula. Felix Oswald described baboons from the site of Canberra north, and they were named after him. They're one of the most common baboons in the Pleistocene, Therapithecus oswaldi, and that's cool. So there they are, Therapithecus oswaldi. They were described by Felix Oswald he collected them in 1911, and they were described not that long afterwards. Louis Leakey became aware of it. The Archdeacon Owen, who is a figure, a religious figure in the area in the early 1900s, was finding sites. He informed Louis Leakey about them in the UK, and Leakey, who was Kenyan by birth, went to the Homo Peninsula and actually investigated sites, Canberra, Kanam, the Rawe Gullies, and found some enigmatic hominid fossils there. The mandible in the lower right is was the type of what he called Homo kanamensis that he found at Kanam West. And you've got these stack of cranial fragments from Canberra north. And he thought these actually represented an ancestor to Homo sapiens, as well, Homo kanamensis, as well as early Homo sapiens from this site. That was very controversial, though. He got embroiled with controversy over his claims. And at the same time, he was starting to investigate Oldowan, and they just shifted over to Oldowan Gorge. And the rest is history with that. He and Mary made fantastic finds there. And that left the Homo Peninsula for future generations, which includes me and the people who work with me. So here's Canberra South. I before Nyanga, this is where I was working when Nyanga was first brought to our attention. And here we've got a really nice Oldowan site 2 million years ago, one of the largest Oldowan excavations. We spent 20 years excavating it. There are fossils and artifacts, thousands of them. We think that there's early plant processing going on here, so underground storage, organ processing. We think they're also hunting small antelopes from the study of the fossils from the site. So there's some of the small antelope bones. And it's an open setting, much more open setting than most Oldowan sites. So environmentally, it's interesting. Behaviorally, it's interesting. So we spent a lot of time working here, basically trying to make something comparable to some of the bigger sites that Mary Leakey and now subsequent researchers at Oldowan have made. That a large assemblage from another site outside of Oldowan Gorge or Kubifora.
I can only imagine how thrilled Louis Leakey would be at this discovery.
I wonder. It's too bad he's not alive to see it, because, he was definitely interested in this area. He just didn't have time to do everything.
No. Uh, what was the Homo Peninsula like millions of years ago?
Well, we know that, at Nyanga times, it, it's the deposits go back to 6 million years, but where I've worked most most carefully, starting at Nyanga at around, 2.5 to 3, is there's that stream channel. There's evidence of some trees, but most of the fauna is eating grass. So I think there's actually probably, a riparian woodland along the channel, and then it opens up into to much more grassy habitats nearby, because most of the animals are in fact eating C4 plants. They're eating grass and those sorts of plants. At Canberra was very open as well. Canberra is one of the most open Oldowan sites found, and it shows that hominids would repeatedly go back to a setting that is relatively open. It had seasonally had waters flowing through it, like so with rains. I think slope wash would come down. It might have been a good area to get tubers, because there seems to be pretty good evidence of tuber processing there. And also there are a lot of young antelopes. So if there was a lake not so far away, and it may be that hominids were seasonally, you know, hunting those young antelopes, as well as acquiring tubers maybe year round.
Well, we've heard about the history of the Homo Peninsula. Let's hear about you. How,
Ah,
when did you become interested in becoming a paleoanthropologist?
I probably was looking at bones when I was in my diapers. I've always been interested in fossils. My parents tell me I was always, interested in prehistory, and I definitely have been interested in all sorts of, aspects of the past, not just the deep past, but the more recent past too. So I'm interested in sort of classical archaeology as well. Here's me as a graduate student with a beard next to Rick Potts, who also has a beard there, in 1987. That was when we were, first investigating Canberra, where Lewis had worked for my dissertation. Here's me digging at Olorgesailie. I was, a lot younger then. I was thin once. And here I am as a junior professor at UCLA, working on some bones from a locality called named Kanam East. So another one of the ones that Lewis had worked at. And here I'm at some localities. This is the Abundu Formation in Kanam East, as well as the Rawe Formation north of Hama Mountain. These we actually think are the same age as Nyanga. So part of the research going forward is looking at a packet of sediments that are probably, 2.5 to 3 million years old in different parts of the peninsula, and trying to actually develop not only Nyanga, but sort of the broader context of these sedimentary packets around the mountain, around Hama Mountain.
One of the things I really enjoyed discussing with you and planning this is really, everything that goes into being a scientist, because it's so much more than just being an expert in your field. What do you think it means to be a well-rounded scientist?
I think you need to be curious, and you have to be. You can't really be too self. You've got to be curious, and you've got to be willing to ask questions and not worry about what people think about you. So just whenever you have a question, just ask it. And the whole point of the scientific endeavor is to learn. Don't worry about people judging you. Be persistent. I think persistence is huge. Just keep at it. And most people are smart enough to do almost anything, but really being curious enough, being persistent, and not worrying about what people think about you, just worrying about you developing your own knowledge base. So asking whatever you need to ask for you to understand things. I think those are really important components of being successful in science.
Well, now let's take some questions from our viewers. We have quite a few questions already. If you have not gotten your question for Tom in the chat right now, please be sure to get those questions in. Okay, let's see. Our first question comes from Pete. Hi, Pete. Okay. Presumably, a lot of butchery sites are at the water's edge. Does that affect where you look, knowing that water levels have been variable?
Well, we find a lot of I mean, at the water's edge, you also get sediment being deposited. So you have a bias towards riverine and lacustrine sites in the paleoanthropological record in East Africa. In South Africa, they're often in caves, but in Eastern Africa, they're found around streams and lakes a lot because that's where sediments are being deposited. So there's a bias towards sites being preserved where sediments are being deposited, which usually keeps them by the water. We do have a paleo landscape site, which has some non-lacustrine or non-riverine elements to it, and we'll be looking across that to see what we find in the future. That's a site that Emma Finestone will be working on with me, called Sari River. And Olorga Siley is a big landscape. Rick Potts is working at a big landscape assemblage too. So people do look for occurrences away from water. It's just water preserves things so well that you tend to find things in sediments deposited by water, and that just orients you that way. But yeah, it's important to look away from water when you have the opportunity to look across the landscape.
Thank you so much for your question, Pete. Our next question comes from Patty. Patty asks, which hominid do you think made the Lomequian tools?
Well, that's a good question. There are, quite a few different Australopithecines at that time, Australopithecines. In East Africa, so there's genus Australopithecus and there's also Kenyanthropus around at that time, roughly that time as well. So probably some form of Australopithecus or something closely related to it, I would think. Homo and Paranthropus aren't known from that far back in time yet. But if you have Homo at 2.8, and if we've got Paranthropus at around 2.9 at Yayanga, then it could be that they go farther back in time too. It could be that even the Oldowan goes back farther in time. At this point, though, I would guess like an Australopithecus of some sort.
Sorry about that. Our next question comes from Gary, and thank you so much, Patty, for your question. Gary asks, is it still prevailing opinion that Homo erectus discovered cooking about 1 million years ago?
Well, there is some evidence in terms of cooking. Well, there's having controlled use of fire and then evidence for cooking. I would assume that when there's controlled use of fire, that probably cooking is occurring as well. I think the oldest evidence for fire that everyone agrees on is from Gesher Bennett Yaakov in Israel at about 800,000 years ago, where you've got waterlogged sediments and really like exquisite preservation that shows that I think makes a really compelling case for hominids using fire. There are earlier sites both in Eastern and Southern Africa where the evidence is, I think, potentially there. I wouldn't say it's not there. It's just not at the level of certainty that you've got at GBY in Israel. So, there are claims for fire at about 1.4 million years ago at a number of sites, both in Kubifora and Chezawanja. A little bit younger, maybe at Chezawanja. And then also in Southern Africa as well, in Swartkrans and Wonderwick Cave as well. So I wouldn't be surprised if fire is that age, potentially. I think Homo erectus at some point is probably controlling fire. So the question is having really definitive evidence for it. And the problem is that early campfires are hard to see in the geological record.
Our next question comes from Tam. And thank you again so much, Gary, for your question. Are there any examples of Paranthropus fossils from elsewhere with cut marks on the Paranthropus bones? I'm wondering if they could be dinner rather than diner.
I think that would be awesome if that was the case. I mean, not awesome for the Paranthropus that was eaten, but But I would love to find some evidence of that. It would just be really interesting. But no, there's no evidence. There's no evidence yet of a paranthropus with cut marks on it. There is evidence of a form of early Homo at Sterkfontein Cave in South Africa. Something around like the ilk of Homo habilis that's got some cut marks on it. So not paranthropus, but maybe early Homo.
Thank you so much for your question, Tam. And I also want to have a special shout out. We got a donation from an anonymous donor who was watching the episode. So thank you so much. Donations go
very
directly
nice.
to supporting our programs. So it is so incredibly appreciated. So thank you very much. Our next question comes from Anne Marie. Congratulations, Tom. Have you found, or is there irrefutable evidence that the technology originated in Africa and then spread to other parts of the world, for example, by acculturation?
At this point, the oldest evidence, and by far in terms of number of sites, that the evidence is strongest for Africa. I think probably some acculturation process could be going on with the Oldowan as it's spreading around. I think groups perhaps that didn't have Oldowan technology might be adopting it over time. And if you've got groups of hominins making Oldowan tools, and you've got female or male dispersal, one of the sexes dispersing and going into other groups, and they're bringing the knowledge of tool use with them, then it could be something as simple as that for the tool technology to spread. Individuals just moving between groups, and the technology being picked up in a group where it hadn't been used. Yeah, but I think the evidence is better in Africa now. I'm perfectly willing to entertain older sites in Asia if it becomes really clear that that's the case, but that isn't clearly the case at this point. At this point, it looks like Africa.
Let me see here. I'm trying to figure out where our next question comes from. Madison. And thank you so much, Anne-Marie. It's when we have a lot of questions, it takes a little bit of time to get them to come up. Find anything interesting about Oldowan hominids' dental morphology in relation to them increasing using technology to access and cut their food?
Well, hey Madison, the thing about Oldowan hominins, not specifically Oldowan hominins per se, and again, because we're not sure which ones are making the oldest tools. I think definitely everyone would agree that Homo erectus, or if you prefer Homo ergaster for early African, what other people would call Homo erectus, they're using tools. I don't think anybody doubts that, and they'd be using Oldowan tools. And their teeth, it's not the morphology of the teeth so much as the size of the teeth. Homo erectus is, on average, smaller teeth than earlier forms of Homo for their body size, which suggests that tool use over time, and then you see that decrease in tooth size as well in hominid evolution in the genus Homo. And it suggests that technology associated with preparing food and consuming food is decreasing some of the selective pressure for having a giant dental apparatus, and teeth and jaws slowly get smaller over time, and maybe not slowly, but get smaller over time. And that's clearly seen with Homo erectus versus earlier forms of Homo. So I think that would be kind of the first example you'd see of anatomy being affected by by the use of technology. Jaws and teeth getting somewhat smaller, as in the genus, in the lineage of Homo over time.
We have a question from our website. What kind of evidence would be sufficient enough to pin down the manufacture of tools to a specific maker apart from Homo sapiens, with all doubts associated cleared?
Well, if you're talking about these early sites, I think it's going to be complicated. I think if you're talking about later sites, Homo erectus is dispersing over a huge area. There's a lot of archaeology associated with erectus, and it's assumed, that the association of lithic technology with an erectus is very clear and well accepted. I mean, a lot of people would be happy or comfortable saying Homo habilis is making stone tools as well, and perhaps Homo rudolfensis, but certainly habilis. In earlier sites, because we actually don't know much about early Homo older than 2 million years ago. There are very few fossils. There are no skeletons. The fossils we have tend to be very scrappy in jaws. We don't even know what their brain size is. We could find that early Homo's got a smaller brain than Homo habilis or Homo rudolfensis does after 2 million years ago. We don't know what their faces look like. So we actually know very, very little about Homo earlier on. And Paranthropus, looks like Paranthropus at about, with the black skull, however old that is. I don't know, maybe 2.5 million years ago. So you've got these different hominins out there, and it's not clear, who's using what. So I'm just blathering at this point. I think it's a very, and I'm blathering because it's very complicated. I don't think you can say with definitively who's using things prior to Homo erectus making stone tools, and whatever is ancestral to Homo erectus would likely be a stone tool user as well for some of the earlier sites. But once you get back to the oldest sites, like 2.6 to 2.9, it's a little less clear. I mean, Homo is around and is represented by half a mandible, and Paranthropus is around, and some of Australopithecus is around as well. So I think for us to say we'd need more sites, more associations with hominins that we feel comfortable are associations between a fossil, a species, and a maker. And if we have sites at times where some of these taxa don't exist, so you can narrow it down to just a lineage that's around at that time, that would be useful. I mean, if Australopithecus is making the Lemequian, who's to say that Australopithecus or Paranthropus might not be making early Oldowan tools as well?
Our next question comes from Hannah. What are your ideas on the Oldowan method and culture in the archaeological context? Indications of shared ideas, language, etc.
Well, people debate whether you'd need to actively teach a technology at the level of the Oldowan, or whether just by observing, just through observational learning, someone could pick it up. So are there actually adults who are, through pantomime or maybe through some vocalizations and gestures, actually trying to help individuals learn how to, experts are helping other individuals learn how to make the Oldowan? Or are individuals just sort of watching and picking it up on their own, just once they see an individual and how they're striking one stone against another, they pick up 2 stones and they practice and they try to do it themselves until they gradually master it themselves. It's not clear about this, given that it does spread over a big geographic area and lasts a long time. It may be that there's some sort of simple instruction going on just for this kind of fidelity of transmission. So I think maybe there's some simple instruction going on, but I can't say for sure.
Well, we have more questions, but we're not going to be able to get to all of them today. But I do have a question of what is next for you and your team.
Well, we're planning on going to Nyanga this summer. We had a short field season there last summer, just our first post-COVID field season. And there's just so much to do there. I mean, we've really only worked in one little spot, and the gully, the sediments we're interested in go for half a mile. And there are different spots, and I want to look at activities other than butchering hippos. So I want to find, hominin use of stone tools in other contexts besides large mammal butchery. We need to investigate the in paleo environment a little bit more. And hopefully, in the long run, we'll find some more hominins too. And some of these issues about who's actually making the tools will be worked out. So there's all sorts of stuff to do there. And then, like I said, there are packets of sediment, like at the Rahway Formation and the Abundu Formation, which are in areas where Louis Leakey worked, that we think are probably coeval with the Nyayanga sediments. And we want to start thinking about this time interval over a broader region. As well. And then we're always surveying and looking for new sites. I think there are sites that are Nyayanga aged in other places. And we just need to investigate those spots better. Everything takes time. I mean, when we started, very little was known in the 80s. Very little was known about the peninsula. It just takes a huge amount of time to sort of work up geological contexts and chronologies, especially when you have a volcano that doesn't produce easy to date crystals. So dating is harder on the peninsula than it is in other places in East Africa. So yeah, there's a ton to do.
Well, we are just so grateful for you that you joined us just on the cusp of, or I guess just after your paper was released.
Right.
And again, congratulations to you and your team.
Well, I think the Leakey Foundation's great. So anything to support the Leakey Foundation.
Well, next time on Lunch Break Science, we will be meeting Dr. Emma Mbua and learning about the Cantus fossil site that dates to 3.5 million years ago on the outskirts of Nairobi in Kenya. I also want to thank John and another anonymous donor for their donation to Lunch Break Science. We thank you so much. Thank you all for taking a break from your day and feeding your brain with the Leakey Foundation. Until next time, stay hungry for knowledge.
Yep. Ciao.
Lunch Break Science is brought to you by the Leakey Foundation and made possible by the generous support of the Anne and Gordon Getty Foundation, Camilla and George Smith, and the Joan and Arnold Travis Education Fund. Show your support of Lunch Break Science by subscribing to our YouTube channel, getting notifications, liking our videos, and donating. Still hungry for science and can't wait till our next episode? Check out Origin Stories, the Leakey Foundation's award-winning podcast. Origin Stories is available wherever you listen to podcasts. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.